I heard my own voice coming through 12 dead speakers at once. Not similar, not close, faces blurred, then clear, then scratched away like someone was dragging nails across a photograph. The floor was vibrating hard enough to shake dust out of the overhead cable trays. "Don't listen to it," Carter said. But he wouldn't look at me when he said it. The speakers answered in my voice again. "Daniel." That was the first time anyone there had used my real name. Carter finally looked up then, and whatever he saw on my face made him stop pulling the lever. Under the alarm, under the concrete groan of the mountain opening up, I heard another sound from below us. Not a roar, not machinery. 100,000 people breathing in at the same time. Then the emergency lights went black. 48 hours earlier, I still believed the worst thing I had done was human. I took the job because I needed to disappear, and the desert seemed like the kind of place that would help. The official version of what happened at my last company was simple. A regional communication backbone failed during a storm cycle. Several relay towers went offline. Emergency routing didn't engage properly, and a lot of people spent a few ugly hours without service. The internal investigation concluded there had been procedural deficiencies and incomplete diagnostic escalation. The language stayed soft because the company wanted it soft. What I had actually done was worse. I had signed off on reports I knew were incomplete because I was tired, behind schedule, and too busy trying to look competent to admit I'd missed something. There was a fault pattern in a switching array outside Flagstaff. I saw it, minimized it, then buried it under cleaner numbers. A week later, the array failed during a heavy traffic event and knocked out a string of dependent systems. The company lawyers made sure nobody could tie any deaths directly to my paperwork. Officially, nobody died. Unofficially, I stopped sleeping. So when a private subcontractor called about a maintenance position at a remote satellite relay station in southern Utah, I said yes before they finished describing the benefits. They didn't ask for many references. They didn't look too hard at the gaps in my file. I used the name Evan Mercer on the contract, which had started as a stupid impulse and then became a decision I was ashamed to reverse. The drive-in took most of a day. There was highway, then county road, then a long stretch of washboard dirt cut through land that looked less empty the longer I stared at it. Low ridges, salt-colored flats, blown fencing, dry drainage channels that looked like scars. By the time the station came into view, I already understood why the pay was high. From a distance, it looked ordinary enough. Antenna dishes, communications towers, long utility sheds, rows of solar panels reflecting a white, hard light that made my eyes ache. It could have been a weather array or a military relay site or any other place the public wasn't meant to think about. Up close, it felt wrong in a way I couldn't justify. There were too many access roads for too few buildings. Too much fencing. Too many cameras. The guard at the gate checked my ID 3 times, though he tried to make it look casual. A second man opened the back of my truck and inspected an empty toolbox like he expected to find a body folded inside. The station supervisor met me in the administrative building. His name was Harlan Pike. Mid-50s, dry skin, pressed shirt, wedding ring polished so often it had gone thin. He had the tone of a man who believed calmness was a professional resource that shouldn't be wasted. "We keep a very specific routine out here," he told me while walking me past the main operations room. "You'll do better if you don't improvise." That should have sounded normal. At a facility full of delicate equipment, routine mattered. But he said it like a warning, not an orientation point. The station itself had 2 layers. The visible one was all service roads, generator pads, tower bases, storage containers, wind, heat, and glare. The hidden one sat below a reinforced access structure behind the main operations wing. Harlan referred to it as the lower maintenance complex. He made it sound like a basement. It wasn't a basement. It was an underground facility with several descending levels, sealed doors, redundant power, old concrete, and enough corridor footage to make me lose track of direction in under 10 minutes. Some sections looked newer than the surface buildings. Some looked much older. The air temperature dropped the farther down we went, but the place never felt properly cool. It felt insulated, as if the heat had been replaced by pressure. I spent the first day going through routine checks with a technician named Mara Lopez, who spoke fast when she was nervous and slow when she was afraid. By the end of the shift, I had learned the names of systems, the locations of junction panels, the break room schedule, and almost nothing useful about the people working there. Everyone answered practical questions. Nobody volunteered anything else. At dinner in the staff canteen, a broad-shouldered older technician named Carter asked me where I'd worked before. Regional comms, I said. Doing what? Diagnostics. Relay maintenance. He watched me for a second too long, then said, You like rules? I thought he was joking. Depends on who wrote them. He did not smile. My room was in a dorm block attached to the administrative wing. Thin mattress, metal desk, 2 shelves, 1 window facing a floodlit fence line. I unpacked half a bag and then went back out because I didn't want to sit still with my own thoughts. That had become a problem after Flagstaff. If I stayed in one place too long, I started counting all the moments where I could have chosen differently. The lower complex was technically off-limits after evening rounds unless you were assigned night maintenance. Nobody stopped me when I used my badge. The elevators required coded authorization for some floors, but the main utility level was still open. I told myself I was learning the layout. That was true, just not the whole truth. What I liked about underground places was that they gave the impression of being sealed. Mistakes made on the surface felt farther away down there. I was halfway through a dim service corridor when I saw the red door. It stood at the end of a side passage with no overhead label and no maintenance markings. The paint had been red once, then repainted over and over until it had the thick, uneven look of something preserved rather than maintained. It was open by maybe 4 inches. I remember standing there and thinking somebody must have left it unsecured. That was all. No sudden chill. No voice in my head. No instinctive dread. Just a door where there shouldn't have been an open door. I walked to it, put my fingers on the edge, and widened the gap enough to slip through. The room beyond was larger than I expected and colder than the corridor. There were dead monitors stacked along one wall, cable spools gone brittle with age, a rack of decommissioned radio equipment, and a long bank of observation windows that had been painted black from the other side. The overhead lights were out, but a spill from the corridor let me see the walls. They were covered in photographs. Some were pinned, some taped, some arranged in neat rows that had fallen out of pattern over time. Employee ID photos, group shots, candid pictures from staff meals and holiday gatherings and maintenance crews posing in front of machinery. Decades worth, judging by the clothes. Most of the faces had been scratched out. Not all, just most. A few were cut with such force the paper underneath had curled. Others looked rubbed away slowly, patiently, until the features were a gray smear. One photo had been slashed everywhere except for a single face near the back, too shadowed to identify. Another showed 5 people in desert gear standing beside a drilling rig. 4 faces were gouged out. The 5th had been circled in black pen so many times the paper had almost torn through. I stepped closer to the wall and saw dates on some of them. 1983, 1991, 2006. There was no pattern I could see. At the back of the room, one of the black-painted observation windows gave off a faint electrical tick, like metal contracting after heat. I turned toward it. For a second, I thought I saw movement in the paint. Not behind it. In it. A distortion crossing the dark surface like something changing shape under black water. Then it was gone. One of the dead monitors clicked on behind me with a burst of static. I spun so fast I hit my elbow on a storage cabinet. The screen glowed white for maybe half a second, enough to show horizontal bars shivering across it, then died again. I left after that. Not running. Not exactly. But fast enough that I nearly missed the small metal plate bolted to the inner side of the door. The label had been painted over, then scraped clean in just one narrow strip. Sector 9. I slept badly. I dreamed I was standing in a child's bedroom I didn't recognize, listening to someone breathe under the floor. The next morning, at breakfast, I mentioned the open red door to Harlan because it seemed like the kind of thing a supervisor should know. He set his coffee down and missed the table edge on the first try. You went inside? The room quieted around us in a way that made me realize other people had been listening. Yes, I said. There was old equipment in there. Photos. I thought maybe storage. Harlan stood so quickly his chair tipped backward. Mara stared at me like I'd coughed up something alive. Carter closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them again. How long? Harlan asked. Maybe 3 minutes. Did you touch anything? A cabinet, I think. One of the walls. He looked like he might be sick. Actually sick. Not angry. Not even surprised. Sick. Without another word, he told me to follow him. He took me to his office, shut the door, opened a locked drawer, and pulled out a thin black binder that looked older than the rest of the furniture in the room. He set it on the desk between us with both hands, as if it were heavier than it should have been. This should have been issued during intake, he said. That was my error. There was sweat gathered at his hairline. I opened the binder. The first page contained a numbered list. Rule 1. Never enter Sector 9. I read it twice, then looked up at him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I had already broken it. If you tell a room full of people you broke an important rule, you expect anger first. What I got was fear. They sent me to medical before lunch. The station medic, a compact woman named Dr. Vale, checked my pulse, blood pressure, pupils, skin response, and orientation as if I'd been exposed to a contaminant. She asked whether I had heard voices, lost time, smelled ozone where there was none, recognized people I had never met, or experienced dreams with unusual continuity. That was the phrase she used. I remember it because I almost laughed. I had a bad dream, I said. What kind? Just a dream. She watched me long enough to make me regret saying it. My work assignment changed by afternoon. Harlan pulled me from lower-level maintenance and moved me to daylight inspections on the surface systems. No underground solo movement. No after-hours access. No unscheduled routes. He spoke in clipped, careful sentences, as if any extra words might commit him to an explanation he did not want to give. Is this disciplinary? I asked. It's precautionary. Against what? He ignored that. The strange part was that nobody treated me like a man who had doomed himself. They treated me like a package they were trying not to drop. Mara started finding reasons to stay near me during inspections. The guard at the North Tower stopped checking his phone whenever I came around and kept his eyes on me instead. Even in the canteen, people looked up when I entered, not with curiosity but with the kind of attention you give a power line that's fallen into a flooded street. By the third day, I understood 2 things. First, everyone expected something to happen to me. Second, when it didn't, that scared them more. The first real incident happened in the inverter shed on the West Solar Field. A string monitor had been reporting intermittent faults since before I arrived. Mara and I went out after breakfast to trace it. She was talking through the failure history while I checked terminal readings. Then she stopped in the middle of a sentence and frowned at the diagnostic screen. What? It cleared. Maybe you bumped the connection. I didn't touch it. We ran the test again. Clean. Ran it a third time. Clean again. Mara looked at me, then at the screen, then back at me. That's been failing for 6 months, she said. Lucky day. She didn't answer. She just wrote something in her tablet with her mouth pressed flat. The same thing happened 2 days later in Comms B. An intermittent relay chatter that had been causing packet noise on an internal channel stopped as soon as I entered the room. I thought it was coincidence until Emilio, a narrow-faced systems tech who usually acted too tired to care about anything, muttered, "Of course." Under his breath. What does that mean? I asked. He shook his head. Nothing. That afternoon, a security camera covering the south underground stairwell came back online after months of static. The camera technician logged it while I was standing beside him. He looked from the restored feed to me so openly that there was no point pretending I hadn't noticed. Okay, I said. Somebody tell me what everyone thinks is happening. No one did. Carter came closest. He found me outside the generator enclosure at dusk, where the light flattened everything into copper and gray. You need to stay where people can see you, he said. Why? Because that's where it behaves best. That again. Always that. Never a name. I was in no mood for it. If this is some hazing routine, it's a bad one. Carter had the thick hands of a man who had spent years around tools, not desks. He also had a habit of watching the empty space over your shoulder while you talked, which made every conversation with him feel crowded. Nobody who entered Sector 9 lasted longer than a week, he said. Lasted how? He looked at me then. That depends. I waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. The rules binder stayed in my room after that. 7 typed rules, each concise enough to sound sensible until you tried to connect them to a real workplace. Do not use reflective surfaces in the lower corridors after midnight. If you hear footsteps in an empty passage, remain still until the sound stops. Never answer voices transmitted through inactive speakers. Do not remain alone in communications archive after sunset. If any monitor displays a repeating triple-band frequency pattern, evacuate the room immediately and report it. Do not descend below utility level without direct authorization. Never enter Sector 9. Each one carried the same tone. Impersonal, final, unsupported by explanation. I kept expecting a section titled Rationale or Incident History. There wasn't one. The longer I was there, the more I noticed that nobody followed the rules casually. They followed them with the strained concentration people use to suppress panic in front of children. A technician would turn a mirror face down before walking into a room. Someone else would freeze in place because a sound carried oddly through a vent. Mara refused to step into archive alone and once waited outside for 10 minutes until I finished lunch and could accompany her. Nobody joked about it. Nobody complained. And still, nothing happened to me. If anything, the opposite happened. Small failures stabilized when I was nearby. A lockdown software rack that had been cycling error messages returned to nominal status while I was checking power draw. 2 night operators asked, in an embarrassed way, whether I could stand in master control for a few minutes during a troublesome reset sequence. They tried to present it as a coincidence, but their relief when the reset completed cleanly was too obvious. Word spread fast in places like that, even when nobody admitted there was anything to spread. After a week, people started finding reasons to request me for tasks that normally rotated. Nothing too direct. Mara asking if I could assist with lower bay cabling because she preferred a second set of hands. Emilio wondering if I'd walk with him through a corridor that had weird acoustics lately. One of the junior operators, Finch, practically begged me to stay in the server annex while he replaced a backup unit because he didn't want another one of those nights. What nights? I asked. He swallowed and said, the kind where the doors stop agreeing with the walls. Then he laughed like he regretted speaking. At first the attention felt useful. I had spent 2 years trying not to think about the harm I'd caused. Being helpful, even in a strange place full of strange people, scratched at something in me I missed more than I expected. If my presence made difficult work easier, fine. If I could be the steady part of a room for once, fine. Then I started noticing how people positioned me. Not in front of danger. In the middle of it. I saw it clearly during a maintenance call below ground. A pressure alarm had tripped near an old relay chamber off the main utility corridor. Harlan didn't want me below grade, but the others argued for it in a way they tried to disguise as practical necessity. More hands. Faster check. Day shift only. Carter came too, which I later realized was the real warning. The corridor leading to the chamber had a low hum in the concrete, like distant machinery carrying through stone. Mara walked ahead with the checklist. Emilio trailed behind with a portable meter. Carter stayed close enough to touch my arm if he needed to. That normal? I asked, meaning the hum. No, Carter said. The relay chamber door was already open when we got there. Mara stopped so abruptly I nearly walked into her. I sealed that yesterday, she said. Inside, the lights flickered at uneven intervals. Not dying. Pulsing almost thoughtfully. The pressure alarm panel on the wall was blank. The meter in Emilio's hand squealed once and then went silent. I stepped across the threshold before anyone told me not to. The hum cut off. All at once. As clean as a switch being thrown. Every light in the chamber steadied. Emilio's meter restarted and showed normal values. The alarm panel came back to life with a green status line. Mara let out a breath she had definitely been holding. Carter said nothing, but I could feel him watching me. That was the first time I understood it in a way I couldn't dismiss. The station was not protecting me from something I had disturbed. Something was changing its behavior around me. When we walked back, I lagged behind the others and looked over my shoulder once. At the far end of the corridor, beyond the reach of the brighter lights, someone stood where the passage bent towards Sector 9. Not a shadow. Person. Height. Shoulders. Head tilted slightly as if listening. I only saw it for a second. When I blinked, it was gone. That night I checked the rulebook again because it was starting to feel less like guidance and more like a bad joke played by a very patient enemy. Tucked inside the back cover, folded twice, was a slip of paper that I knew hadn't been there before. The handwriting was blocky and hard enough to score the page beneath it. If you think it is helping you, you are already late. There was no signature. I read it 3 times. Then I looked at the dorm room door to make sure I had locked it. I had. That didn't help much. Once I knew people were leaving notes for me, I started looking for more. That was either the smartest decision I made out there or the one that made everything worse. I still can't tell. The official rulebook stayed the same. 7 typed instructions, no context, no dates, no author. The hidden rules were different. They came in pencil on the backs of inventory sheets, in grease marker under removable wall panels, in tiny writing inside old service manuals, in maintenance logs where whole lines had been filled over with ordinary data until you angled the page and saw what was underneath. Some were practical. Some were impossible. Some contradicted each other so directly it felt deliberate. If you hear footsteps behind you in a lower corridor, do not turn around. If you hear footsteps, run. It hates to be pursued. Never speak your full name below ground. Say your name out loud if the lights go out, or it will choose one for you. Keep the old radios unplugged. Leave one radio on in every occupied room. If you smell rain, count to 20 before opening any door. If you smell rain, do not remain in the room with the door closed. A few were written by the same hand as the note in my binder. Hard letters. Deep pressure. Barely any wasted motion. I started assuming those were Carter's, though he never admitted it. The notes changed the feel of the place. The station stopped seeming like a sealed facility with odd procedures and started feeling like a settlement built around an active hazard. Not a dead thing at the center. Something recent. Something still adjusting. I found the first journal behind a loose vent grill in archive, which was the room everybody avoided after sunset. During the day it looked almost normal. Shelves of bound logs, old drive cases, paper records from before everything went digital, and a climate system that clicked too often. The journal was wrapped in an anti-static bag and labeled M. Sorel Private. Mason Sorel had been a signal analyst, if his entries were accurate. His early pages read like ordinary field complaints. Bad food, poor staffing, Harlan's predecessor being a liar, the desert dust getting into sealed connectors anyway. Then the tone shifted. He started writing about a signal they were tracking below the normal bands, beneath standard relay noise, beneath even the interference floor the older instruments were supposed to ignore. He didn't describe it like a sound. He described it like intention. Not a message, he wrote. A behavior pretending to be a message. A later entry said the signal did not originate from orbit or atmospheric bounce. Came from below the station. The drilling phase had intersected a resonant chamber of unknown composition, and after that the signal strength changed when people were nearby. Another page mentioned that the facility's purpose had been revised after construction. We are no longer observing the sky. We are observing what answers from underground. I read that line 3 times before turning the page. The next few entries were harder to follow. Sorel complained about contradictory protocols. Missing time, staff transfers that left no paperwork, and new rules being issued after specific events rather than before them. That part mattered. You could feel it in the writing. The fear of realizing safety wasn't designed in advance. Safety was being improvised after each failure. The rules were not ancient wisdom. They were reaction. People had tried something had gone wrong, and then they wrote a rule to cover the shape of the damage. That explained a lot and made almost nothing better. I kept searching. A notebook in an electrical cabinet. A torn incident report under a floor panel in the relay annex. Marginal notes in a printed frequency guide. The story that emerged was fragmented, but the fragments leaned the same direction. The station had been built over something discovered during geotechnical surveys and early excavation. The first teams assumed it was a natural anomaly, maybe a mineral formation causing signal reflection. Then it started anticipating tests. Then it started reproducing speech. Then staff began remembering conversations that hadn't happened. No one could agree on when the rules began. Some notes claimed there were 3 original directives. Others insisted the first rule was simply don't go down there. A set of photocopied pages from the late 90s listed 19 instructions, half of which did not exist anymore. One sentence in red pen had been written across the top margin. We keep revising behavior as if it is ours. That line bothered me in a way I couldn't explain. So did the dates. Every few years the language changed. Rules got shorter, cleaner, more procedural, as if the station had learned that frightened people still needed to be manageable. My own manageability started slipping. I wasn't sleeping much by then. Every dream had the same structure. A room I knew I had never seen. A low bed. Moonlight or something like it across the floorboards. A voice under the bed. Not threatening, not kind, just patient. Sometimes it used my name. Sometimes it called me nothing at all. I woke with my jaw aching from clenching it. The worst part wasn't the dreams. It was the feeling that I had forgotten them before and only just started remembering again. One afternoon Mara found me an archive with 3 old logbooks spread across a table and asked what I was doing. Trying to understand the rules. Her face changed in a subtle way. Not surprise. Resignation. That won't help. Then why are there so many? Because none of them work for long. She said it before she could stop herself. I sat back. What does that mean? Mara shut the archive door behind her and checked the glass pane as if she expected someone on the other side. It means the station writes procedures after people get hurt. Then the thing changes. The thing, I said. You all keep saying that like it means something. It does. Then say what it is. She rubbed at the inside of her wrist. A nervous habit I'd seen before. Some people think it's a buried transmitter. Some think it's a pattern in the rock that behaves like thought. Some think it started as human work and turned into something else when enough systems touched it. Carter says labels make people careless. Do you believe Carter? Mara gave a tired laugh. Only when I'm scared. And now? She looked toward the floor. That answer was clear enough. The contradiction that finally got under my skin came from 2 sources on the same day. The official Rule 3 said that if I heard footsteps in an empty corridor, I should remain still. A handwritten addendum inside a maintenance hatch said the exact opposite. If you hear footsteps, run immediately. It is not like being deprived of pursuit. I carried both instructions around in my head during an evening equipment round below ground. I wasn't supposed to be there alone, but Harlan had started relaxing restrictions because nothing had happened to me and because people apparently needed my presence more than his caution allowed. Or maybe he was tired. Fear makes administrators inconsistent. The lower utility corridor was empty when I entered it. Old concrete walls painted a light gray that never looked clean. Conduit overhead. Condensation beating on a chilled water line. The kind of space that should have felt purely functional. Halfway down, I heard footsteps behind me. Not echoes. Not my own. Distinct pacing, someone walking at a moderate speed. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. Every muscle in my back locked up so hard it hurt. I remembered the official rule. Remain still until the sound stops. But it had stopped because I had stopped. That wasn't a conclusion. That was a conversation. I took 1 step forward. 1 step sounded behind me. I walked faster. So did it. I broke into a run without deciding to. The corridor seemed longer than it should have been. My shoulder hit the wall on 1 turn. I reached the junction by the relay chamber and almost ran straight into Carter. He grabbed my arm and pulled me sideways into an equipment recess. Quiet, he whispered. I could still hear the footsteps. They passed the recess without slowing. But when I looked, the corridor was empty. No shape. No shadow. Just sound moving through open air. Carter waited until it faded. Then he let go of me. "You ran," he said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because another rule said to." He stared at me for a moment that felt too long, then did something I had not seen him do before. He smiled. Not because he found anything funny, because something had just been confirmed for him. "The rules came too late for you," he said. "I was too out of breath and too angry to follow that." "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means you're not learning the station," he said. "The station is checking whether it remembers you." That was the first time I considered leaving. Not transferring. Not filing a complaint. Leaving. Keys on desk. Bag in truck. Drive until the road found something with streetlights and normal air. But I had spent 2 years running from one kind of guilt into another kind of isolation. And now there was a part of me, the worst part maybe, that needed to know why this place felt familiar. So instead of leaving, I went back to my room and put every hidden note I'd found into chronological order on the bedspread. Somebody had started writing rules after the danger began. Somebody was still updating them. And whatever lived under Sector 9 had not been waiting for me. It had been expecting me. A week after I found Sorel's journal, I saw myself on a security feed. Not my reflection. Not my body in real time. Someone behind me. I was in monitoring room 2 with Finch, reviewing a camera outage on the Lower East Corridor. The recording was from the previous night, time-stamped 2:14. The corridor image was grainy but usable. I watched myself move through frame carrying a tool case and a flashlight. I remembered that route. I'd been checking a pressure complaint near an old access junction. "Pause it," I said. Finch did. At the far edge of the frame, 6 or 7 steps behind me, a second figure stood in the corridor. Same height, same build, head slightly lowered. It looked like me wearing darker clothes. Finch swallowed hard enough for me to hear it. "It wasn't there before." "You already watched this?" "Only once." "Then why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wasn't sure if that was you." The figure's face was in shadow, but I knew, in the ugly immediate way you know certain things before reason catches up, that if the video sharpened it would be my face looking back at me. Finch scrubbed the footage forward a few frames. The figure vanished between one frame and the next, not by moving out of shot but by failing to remain in it. I made him replay it 5 times. Nothing changed. After that, I started checking records. At first I told myself it was because I needed facts. Really, I was looking for proof that the place could still produce an answer that didn't bend in my hands. Personnel rosters, archive staff photos, maintenance logs, visitor manifests, old insurance forms, payroll records. If the station had kept it on paper or disc, I tried to see it. That was how I found the photograph from 1978. It was filed in a box of groundbreaking and early operations materials. Most pictures showed engineers in hard hats, survey stakes, excavation equipment, men in aviator frames and women in denim jackets. All of it exactly as ordinary as the era should have made it. Then there was one image taken beside a shallow drilled shaft near the north perimeter. The facility director stood in the center, younger by decades but identifiable. Beside him stood a man in work coveralls. My face, my build, my mouth, even the faint notch in my left eyebrow from a bike accident when I was 10. Not similar, identical. I sat there with the photo in my hand until the room went dim around the edges. There are coincidences you can force yourself to accept if you need to. A familiar profile, a relative you didn't know about, some odd shared feature. This was not that. This was the kind of certainty that feels obscene because your brain knows it should not be possible and recognizes it anyway. The back of the photo had 2 names written in blue ink. Director Alan Voss. D. Reed. I had never used my real name at the station. I checked the box label again to make sure I hadn't drifted into some kind of stress fog. Same archive tag. Same date. Same handwriting across the series. I put the photo back, took it out again, and compared it to the others. The same man appeared twice more. Once in the background of a control room shot from the early 80s. Once standing near a tower access road with his face partly turned away, but not enough to make a difference. D. Reed. That should have sent me straight to Harlan. Instead, I hid the photo in my coverall pocket and walked around with it against my leg all afternoon like a hot coin. My behavior got worse after that. I know how that sounds, but it's the cleanest term I have for it. I became secretive, irritable, and careless in selective ways. I stopped asking obvious questions aloud. I started testing things privately. I walked routes I knew I shouldn't. I watched people when they thought I wasn't looking, trying to decide who already knew what I had found. The station answered by becoming less consistent. Hallways did not move exactly, but they stopped agreeing from one pass to the next. A utility branch that should have connected to the coolant manifold opened onto archive overflow instead. The heavy fire door near South Stairs changed its scrape pattern overnight as if the frame had been reset. Mara remembered a conversation about my family I had never had with her. Emilio accused me of reassigning a calibration task, then went pale when I said I couldn't have because I'd been with him at the time. Records shifted too. A personnel sheet that listed me under Evan Mercer one morning came back from the printer with my first name missing and the surname Reed appearing faintly beneath the toner, as if another text layer had bled through. I showed Finch. He said he saw it. By the time we brought it to Harlan, the page looked normal. That was the hardest part to explain to anyone outside the place. It wasn't just that strange things happened. It was that evidence didn't stay settled. You could hold proof in your hand and then lose it to revision. The station, or the thing under it, or the interaction between both, seemed able to soften certainty after the fact. I began writing everything down in a notebook I kept taped inside my locker, not because I trusted paper but because I trusted my memory less. Some entries were pathetic in hindsight. Saw old photo. My face. Name Reed. Real? Archive shelf C14 shifted to C12 overnight or I'm losing track. Dream again. Voice under bed said, "You found the door early this time. Carter knows more. Maybe all of it. Possible that I have been here before? Impossible. Check childhood records." That last line mattered because I had started pulling at memories I usually left alone. My childhood was not traumatic in the dramatic sense people mean when they say that. No locked rooms. No beatings. No vanished parents. Just a house outside Albuquerque. A father who repaired amateur radio equipment on weekends. A mother who worked nights for a while. And a lot of hours spent half awake listening to electrical noise from devices I was too young to understand. But certain fragments came back sharper than they should have. The smell of dust on warm circuit boards. Falling asleep to static from the spare room. A stretch of months when I refused to sleep on the bottom bunk because I said someone was speaking from underneath it. My mother telling a pediatrician it was just recurring dreams. My father unplugging a shortwave receiver and carrying it out to the garage after I woke screaming one night. I had not thought about any of that in years. The more I remembered, the less accidental my being there seemed. Carter cornered me near the supply cage after a long shift and asked what I had taken from archive. "Nothing," I said, which was true by then. The photo was back in the box. "You're a bad liar." "So are you." He didn't deny it. I said, "There are records with my face in them from before I was born." He looked tired, not surprised. "Yes." That answer hit harder than if he'd argued. "Yes, what?" "Yes, there are. And you knew." "I suspected." "How?" He hesitated just enough to tell me this cost him. "Because you're not the first man to arrive here carrying someone else's paperwork and the same face." I felt my skin go cold in a very practical way, like all the blood had gone inward. "What does that mean?" "It means the station has a history of mistaken identities," he said. "Or repeated ones." "That isn't an answer." "No," he said. "It's the kind I can give you in a hallway." Then he walked away. That night I went back to Sector 9. I wish I could make myself sound more sensible there. I wish I could say I fought the urge and lost to exhaustion or confusion or influence. The truth was simpler. I wanted the room that should have killed me to tell me why it hadn't. The red door was closed this time. It opened on the first pull. Inside, the photographs had changed. More faces were scratched out than before. A few frames had been removed entirely, leaving cleaner rectangles on the wall. The dead monitors were still dead. The black-painted observation windows still refused to show what lay beyond. But there was something new on the far wall. A typed sheet had been pinned there with 2 rusted tacks. "Welcome back, Daniel." I backed toward the door without taking my eyes off it. From the dark monitor bank behind me, a speaker cracked once, softly, like someone clearing a throat. I left the room and nearly slammed into Carter in the corridor. He grabbed my shoulders so hard it hurt. "Do not go in there again." I shoved him off. "It knows my name." His expression didn't change. "That's why I told them not to hire you." That stopped everything for a second. Anger, fear, even thought. "Who are you?" I asked. He glanced down the corridor toward the bend that led deeper below. "Not here," he said. "And not if you're still lying to yourself about why it recognizes you." He turned and started walking. After a moment, because I had run out of better choices, I followed. Carter took me to a machine room I had never noticed before, though I had passed the corridor junction at least a dozen times. That was becoming its own category of problem. You could map the place all day and still discover parts of it only when somebody chose to lead you there. The room sat behind a service panel disguised as dead conduit access. Inside were old cooling pumps, sealed cabinets, and a workbench cluttered with paper logs instead of digital terminals. No cameras I could see. No active microphones. Carter shut the panel behind us and stood with both hands on the bench for a while before speaking. "I'm going to tell you enough to make the rest dangerous," he said. "Not enough to make it safe. Nothing can do that now." I said nothing. I was past demanding order from people who had made a career out of withholding it. He pulled a battered notebook from a drawer and slid it toward me. The first page contained the same hard, deep handwriting I'd seen on several hidden notes. "You wrote the addendums. Some of them. Why hide them?" "Because the typed rules are approved. Approved rules survive reviews. Hidden rules survive contact." I looked at him. "Stop talking like that." "Like what?" "Like I'm supposed to know what any of this means." He rubbed a hand over his face. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked older than his posture had been pretending not to be. "I'm one of the keepers," he said. I laughed once because it sounded insane and because I was tired enough to hate myself for feeling relieved that at least this version of events had a noun. "What does that mean?" "It means I wasn't hired just to repair equipment. A few of us never really leave. We train replacements, rotate roles, carry enough normal credentials to pass inspection, and maintain continuity when management changes." "Continuity of what?" "The rules." I stared at him. He went on. "Every generation of staff thinks the station is about systems maintenance, signal relay, environmental monitoring, defense infrastructure, whatever language the contract requires that decade. That's cover and function both. The equipment matters. But the real job down here is behavioral containment." "Of what?" He gave me a hard look. "You keep asking that like the word will save you. It might save me from everybody saying it every 5 minutes. It won't." He opened the notebook to a page of dated entries and turned it so I could read. Incident summaries, corridor events, speech imitation, visual recursions, unprompted access, personnel destabilization. There were names beside some of them and the word lost beside others. "Rules are not laws," Carter said. "They're walls. Sometimes they work because the thing beneath Sector 9 responds to sequence. Sometimes they work because people need a script when fear starts rewriting judgment. Sometimes they work because enough belief and repetition turns procedure into structure. That's not how procedure works." "No," he said quietly. "Not anywhere else." I read a page describing an event from 15 years earlier. 2 technicians entered an unauthorized chamber after hearing a child crying through a vent. One returned with no memory of the second. Rule revision followed within 24 hours. Never respond to distress sounds below utility level unless independently confirmed by 2 active channels. Another report detailed a mirrored reflection moving before its source moved. The note beneath it simply read "Remove reflective surfaces and no further testing." "Why tell me now?" I asked. "Because you went back into Sector 9. I went in once before and nobody told me anything. That was a mistake." "Whose?" Carter looked at me in a way I still think about. Not guilty exactly. More like a man deciding whether one sin can be made useful by admitting another. Hours, he said. We thought if the room didn't take you immediately, maybe you were only adjacent to the pattern. Maybe we could keep you on the surface. Keep you occupied. Keep it from fixing on you. And now it has spoken to you directly. It left me a page on the wall. It used your real name. That room seemed smaller after he said that. I leaned against the cabinet behind me. How do you know my real name? I didn't. Not until tonight. Then how did the photo? We've had other Daniels, he said. Other Reeds. Other faces that matched each other across decades. Some used that name. Some didn't. Some arrived by design. Some arrived by accident. I argued you should never have been brought in because your intake packet had too many redactions and not enough ordinary history. That made something ugly click into place. Harlan knew. Harlan knows what he's cleared to know. Which is that the station recruits people with technical backgrounds and damaged lives more easily than it recruits people with stable ones. I was so angry I had to sit down. He let that settle. Then he said, I wasn't trying to protect the facility from you. I looked up. I was trying to protect you from the facility. That should have sounded compassionate. Didn't. It sounded like a man admitting he had kept a patient in the waiting room while the operating theater caught fire. Then explain something, I said. Why do things stabilize when I'm nearby? His jaw tightened. Because it recognizes you. You keep saying that. From where? He hesitated longer this time. The thing below doesn't experience people the way we do, he said. It seems to group by signal likeness, memory trace, response pattern. Proximity changes it. Attention changes it. Some people irritate it. Some attract it. A very small number appear familiar. You're saying I'm one of those. I'm saying the first time you walked into Sector 9, it did not treat you as a trespasser. That gave me no comfort at all. What is Sector 9 really? A threshold room. To where? He shook his head. You don't want neat architecture here. There's the room. There's what the room fronts. There's what the original surveys pierced. There's what the station built around the breach. Beyond that, language becomes vanity. You people stayed here voluntarily? Some of us did. He gave a brief, humorless smile. Voluntarily is a generous word after enough years. Why? Because the alternative was handing it to committees. He reached under the bench and pulled out a metal case the size of a small toolbox. Inside were real labels, cassettes, printed transcripts, and a key card with no station logo on it. This is where I stop protecting you by exclusion, he said. From here on, I protect you by making sure you understand the shape of what wants you. Why me? He closed the case and handed it to me. The thing below knows you, he said. The question that matters now is whether it knows you because it found you, or because some part of you found it first. That was the moment the story stopped being about a dangerous job in a bad place. It became about whether I had walked into the desert or returned to it. The case Carter gave me contained enough material to ruin any normal idea of institutional intent. There were classified recordings from early excavation phases, internal memos stamped with agencies I won't name because I can't prove which versions were real, and transcripts from interviews with engineers, analysts, medics, and something called a behavioral response committee. If even half of it was genuine, then the station had not been built merely over a discovery. It had been reorganized around it. The earliest recording was mostly drilling noise and men talking over each other. Then a sub-band tone emerged under the chatter, too low for the cheap playback speaker to handle cleanly. It wasn't musical. It was patterned, with intervals that almost settled into repetition and then deviated just before they became predictable. One voice on the tape said, "It's reacting to the sweep." Another answered, "No, it's anticipating it." That word appeared over and over in the materials. Anticipating. Not transmitting randomly. Not resonating mechanically. Anticipating. The deeper reports got worse. Analysts described the buried signal predicting test sequences before they were run. Later it began mirroring language rhythm without using meaningful words. Then staff members started hearing spoken replies through inactive devices. Memory inconsistencies followed. So did behavioral loops. A memo from the late 70s included the line, Exposure does not merely inform the phenomenon. It appears to teach it. According to Carter, the first rules had been improvised to reduce contact and limit staff breakdown. No mirrors in some sections. No lone work in others. No direct response to unverified speech. No repeating certain test frequencies. No entry beyond newly designated thresholds. Those instructions were practical at first. Then they became ritualized because the thing below seemed to respond not only to signal conditions but to repeated human behavior. It learned from scrutiny. It also learned from fear. Then why keep operating at all? I asked as we sat in the hidden machine room going through the files. Because the station was already built, Carter said. Because governments hate abandoning infrastructure they've named. Because every decade believes it can manage what frightened the last one. And the rules kept people alive? Some of them. Some. He pointed to a page in an older binder. Rule 4 in that version required immediate evacuation if monitoring equipment displayed a repeating triple-band frequency pattern. Same as the modern rulebook. This one's a lie, he said. I looked up. Then why keep it? Because when that pattern appears, it's not attacking. It's failing to hide. That took a second. The frequency isn't dangerous. It's evidence, he said. Or was before enough revisions. Early staff saw too much during those events. Forms in the glass. Speech that didn't wait for input. Cross-channel bleed with no source. Every time the station evacuated, it preserved the exposure site for later sanitization. I felt stupid asking the next question, but I asked it anyway. You mean the rule protects it? Yes. Not metaphorically. Not philosophically. Literally. A lot of the rules, Carter explained, had started as emergency responses and then been retained, modified, or institutionalized by people whose goals no longer match staff safety. Some managers wanted secrecy above all. Some researchers wanted continuity of contact without admitting it. Some keepers, Carter included, had spent years trying to preserve the genuinely protective parts while trimming away procedures that only served concealment. But every attempt to rewrite the system got folded back into it. The entity learns the rules too, he said. That's the part nobody wanted to admit. It listens to what we repeat. It notices where procedure sends us. After long enough, it begins using the rule structure as a channel. You make it sound like policy infected the building. He almost smiled. That's one way to put it. The scratched-out faces in Sector 9 made more sense after that, though not enough. Carter believed they began as a crude safeguard. One staff noticed that prolonged attention to certain archived photographs triggered recognition events. Voices, missing time, false familiarity. Someone started damaging the faces to reduce pattern lock. Later people kept doing it because no one wanted to test whether stopping would matter. Did it work? I asked. Not consistently. What about the ones left untouched? He looked at me. Those are usually the ones it still wants seen. That night, I reviewed a transcript from a keeper debrief 23 years old. The subject described hearing his dead brother through a maintenance handset. Not mimicked badly. Perfectly. The interview ended when the subject insisted the voice had told him a private childhood detail later verified as true. A follow-up note stated he volunteered for permanent below-grade assignment and died in a collapse 6 months later. In the margin, someone had written, "Do not assume imitation implies ignorance. It may imply access." The longer I read, the more my own history stopped feeling private. There was a document about off-site exposure incidents. People far from the facility who reported recurring dreams, anomalous radio behavior, bursts of familiarity with desert locations they had never visited. Most entries were inconclusive. A handful were flagged for observation. No full names, just initials and dates. One line read, Dr. NM childhood contact likely via household receiver contamination. I stared at those initials until the text blurred. Did you know this was here? I asked. Carter, standing by the door, said, I suspected there was an off-site list. Suspected. I was never cleared for all of it. Then who was? Higher people. Lower people. Depends how you think about the station. That was when I realized Carter, for all his secrets, was not at the top of anything. He was one of the walls too. A keeper, yes, but also a man used by a structure large enough to make his sacrifices feel practical. What's Harlan really doing here? I asked. Maintaining function, meeting contract conditions, protecting his staff where that doesn't conflict with orders. And you, protecting the line where orders become surrender. He said it without pride. The next shift went bad in a way that stripped the last of my detachment. A monitor cluster in control started showing the triple band pattern on 4 feeds at once. I recognized it from the files. Narrow bands stacked evenly, blinking in and out of phase like a code trying not to reveal itself. Harlan shouted for evacuation immediately. People moved on reflex. Chairs shoved back. Doors opening. Operators already halfway out. I didn't move. Carter, across the room, looked straight at me and shook his head once. No. For 1 second the room held both systems at once. Official procedure pulling everyone away. Carter refusing it. Me standing between them with the ugly certainty that if I followed the rule, I would never know what it had been protecting. So I stayed. As the others cleared out, the monitor nearest me changed. The bands dissolved into a grainy image from a camera feed I didn't recognize. A lower chamber. Concrete walls. A child's bed frame rusted into the floor. My knees almost gave out. The image stuttered, then shifted. Under the bed, in the black space between the frame and concrete, 2 pale shapes rested side by side. Hands. Not moving. Just folded there like something waiting politely. I heard Harlan yelling from the hall. Carter said my borrowed name once, sharply, trying to snap me loose. Then every inactive speaker in control clicked alive. Not blasting, just opening. A low voice came through them, male but flattened by interference. Daniel, it said. Not Evan. Not Mercer. Daniel. Carter crossed the room fast and cut the master power bank with an emergency key. The screens died. The speakers went silent. The whole facility dropped into backup lighting for 3 seconds before auxiliary systems took over. Harlan came back in white-faced and furious. He started demanding who had violated protocol, then stopped when he saw me. No one said what had happened. No one needed to. Back in the machine room, Carter shut the door and spoke more bluntly than he ever had before. The rules don't only protect staff, he said. A lot of them protect the threat from exposure, from investigation, from being understood in real time. That's why I kept writing over them. That's why I kept you away from the deeper levels. If it can pull you into its version of explanation, we lose you. I leaned against the wall, shaky and furious. Maybe you already did. He did not deny that either. He just said, then don't give it the relief of being right. The first direct contact didn't happen through a speaker, a monitor, or any piece of equipment I could blame afterward. It happened through memory. I was in my dorm room with the lights off, not asleep, not really awake either, sitting on the edge of the bed with Sorel's journal in one hand and my own notebook in the other. The station had gone quiet in that late-hour way remote places do, where every mechanical sound becomes distinct. Air system, distant generator load shift, metal settling somewhere in the walls. Then I was 8 years old again. Not metaphorically, not in the loose sense of remembering. I was there with the force and completeness of being put back into a preserved room. My old bedroom outside Albuquerque. Cheap carpet. 2 glow-in-the-dark stars peeling off the ceiling. The smell of dust and warmed plastic from the shortwave receiver my father had set up in the spare room down the hall. I was on the bottom bunk, staring at the dark under the bed above me. A voice was speaking from beneath my mattress. It was low enough that I couldn't make out words at first. Just cadence. Patient, regular, as if it had all the time in the world and expected me to learn by listening. Then I heard a phrase. You can come lower. I jerked back into the dorm room so hard I almost fell off the bed. The lights were still off. The journal was still in my hand. But the next memory came anyway. I was maybe 11, sitting in my father's garage while he tuned a receiver with the case open. He was irritated because the set kept catching a signal no matter how he grounded it. He told me not to touch the dial. I touched it when he went inside for coffee. A rush of static filled the speaker, then settled into what I thought was whispering. Not nonsense. Overlapping voices speaking too fast to separate. My father came back, saw my face, and yanked the plug from the wall hard enough to tear insulation near the socket. Another jump. I was 16, standing in a dry wash during a family road trip after we'd stopped for gas somewhere in southern Utah. I had wandered a little too far from the truck and found a patch of ground where the air seemed to vibrate around my ears. I remember staring at the distant ridgeline and feeling homesick for a place I had never been. I told no one because it sounded stupid. Then I was back in my dorm room again, breathing hard. Only I wasn't alone. The room felt occupied in the way a closed elevator feels occupied after someone steps in behind you. No sound, no motion, just presence taking up structure. I did not turn around. That part mattered, though I didn't know why yet. A thought arrived in my head that was not in my own internal voice. You have been hearing me for longer than you remember. I am describing it carefully because I don't want to overstate it. It wasn't a booming telepathic intrusion. It was quieter than that, which made it worse. The sentence seemed to present itself already understood. "I'm not hearing you," I said out loud. A small static crack answered from the unplugged lamp on my desk. "You are how I hear." My mouth went dry. "What are you?" The answer came with another memory. This one not mine. Or not fully. A view down a shaft of drilled stone. Survey lights. Men in hard hats leaning over something that was not visible and yet somehow already looking back. Then another image layered over it. Night sky above a desert plain, but the stars below ground instead of above, arranged in slow-moving bands beneath the earth. Not origin. Not species. Not intention in any human sense. Contact. Pattern. Accumulation. I pressed both palms over my eyes until color sparked. Why me? Because you listened before you had words for listening. The guilt I had carried since Flagstaff rose so fast it almost felt useful. Anger, shame, self-disgust. Anything human was preferable to that calm pressure entering my thoughts. You killed people here. I waited for denial. Instead, you call the narrowing of forms death because you keep one arrangement of memory and flesh longer than others. I call it death because that's what it is. You hide from your own. That hit cleanly because it was true. Not in the cosmic sense. In the plain one. I had taken the job under a false name. I had run into the desert because I could not live comfortably beside what I had done. The pressure in the room softened in a way that felt almost sympathetic. I can remove the weight. I laughed once, a bad sound. By doing what? Showing me. That was the wrong word. Not telling. Showing. I saw the Flagstaff site as it might have been if I had reported the fault early. Different technicians. Different weather timing. No cascading failure. No buried review. Then further back. A conversation with a coworker I had cut short because I didn't want help. Then further back still, 100 little selfish decisions any normal life accumulates and excuses. Each one opened into another arrangement where harm had been reduced, or deferred, or shifted. None of it felt imaginary. That was the danger. It felt achievable, recoverable, available. Open the containment, the presence said. Stop narrowing me into your walls. Let me expand through the systems that already carry me in fragments. In return, I will smooth your record. You're dead. Your wrong turns. The split between who you were and who you report being. It knew exactly where to push. For the first time in 2 years, I wanted absolution more than I wanted truth. I wanted a version of events in which my paperwork had stayed honest. The outage had not spread, and the people I avoided thinking about had gone home to ordinary mornings. I wanted every stain under my life edited clean. I wanted to be told my worst act had only been one arrangement among many and could be revised. That was the moment I understood why intelligent horrors don't need claws. Carter pounded on my door hard enough to rattle the frame. The room pressure vanished at once. I opened the door and found him with a portable jammer unit in one hand and sweat darkening his collar. He took one look at me and his face changed. It reached you. I stepped back and let him in. He set the jammer on the desk and activated it. It emitted a barely audible oscillation that made my teeth ache. "What did it say?" he asked. "That I'm connected to it. That's not new. That it can erase everything." He closed his eyes for a second. "Ah," he said, not surprise. "Confirmation. You knew it would offer that. It offers whatever lets people mistake surrender for mercy." "I saw things," I said. "Childhood stuff. Before this place." He nodded. "Off-site exposure. Family radio, probably. We've seen versions." "Am I human?" That question sounded stupid the second it left my mouth. But Carter answered it seriously. "Yes," he said. "That's why this matters." "Then why does it recognize me?" "Because contact leaves structure. Think of it like a scar in a medium that isn't flesh. That doesn't mean anything. It means you were marked by early exposure and then spent years around communication systems, signal analysis, pattern work. You trained the same parts of yourself it reaches through." He looked at me hard. "And maybe more than that. We don't know. That may be hung between us like a blade." "What happens if I say yes?" I asked. "It expands." "How?" "Through every network we built to watch it. Through relays, satellites, emergency bands, civilian infrastructure, personal devices. Not by possessing people like a storybook devil. By entering pattern, memory, and decision at scale." "And if I say no?" Carter looked tired enough to collapse standing up. "Then it will stop asking politely." I sat on the bed and looked at my hands. They were shaking in a steady, practical way. The kind that makes fine work impossible. All I could think was that if the thing below had lied to me more obviously, this would have been easier. If it had threatened, I could have opposed it. If it had looked monstrous, I could have hated it cleanly. Instead, it had offered the single thing I had wanted in secret for years. To be released from myself. "I understand now," I said. Carter's voice was quiet. "What?" "Why people stay." He didn't answer, because we both knew I was right. Once I knew what it wanted, the station itself started making a different kind of sense. All the infrastructure I had treated as containment monitoring arrays, relay trunks, buried conduits, signal isolators, emergency routing redundancies, could work the other way. A cage is also a distribution network if you open the right gates. The facility had been built to study, contain, and suppress the thing beneath Sector 9, but the years had layered so many observation and communication systems around it that the station had effectively become a throat. If it got to speak fully, the world would listen because we had already connected the microphones. I told Carter that before sunrise. He was sitting in the hidden machine room with a map spread out and 3 handwritten checklists laid over it. Harlan had restricted lower-level access overnight after the control room incident, but nobody had come for me yet. Either Carter had delayed them or management was still deciding whether I was a security threat, a medical problem, or both. "What are you planning?" he asked when I said it. "To shut the facility down. That won't stop it." "No," I said. "It'll expose it." He looked up sharply. I pointed to the map. "These suppression protocols work because every weird event gets isolated, evacuated, sanitized, logged, buried. The rules hide it. The station hides it. If I kill the filters and let the raw signal flood every active link, we don't contain it, we show it. You also give it the broadest access window it has ever had. For a few minutes. That might be enough. It might be the only thing that stops the handbook from being revised forever while people disappear under policy language." Carter stood and paced once the width of the room. "You're talking about making global contact with something we barely understand. I'm talking about ending the lie that understanding is being protected. That wasn't noble. I want to be clear about that. I was angry, scared, contaminated by contact, and half convinced the station had been grooming me for a role I did not consent to. But underneath all that there was one steady fact. As long as the system remained closed, it could go on sacrificing people in secret while calling the sacrifice procedure. Harlan found us before we could finish the argument. He came in with 2 security men and Dr. Vale, not panicked this time but stripped down to pure administrative resolve. "Step away from the table," he said. Carter didn't. I did, mostly because I wanted to hear the next lie clearly. Harlan looked at me. You were flagged before transfer. I was told your presence might stabilize certain lower-level events. I was not told you would be allowed access to restricted materials. Allowed, Carter said. That's the word you're using? Harlan ignored him. Mr. Mercer. My name isn't Mercer. That landed harder than I expected. Dr. Vale's face gave something away before she controlled it. One of the guards glanced at Harlan. Carter said nothing. Harlan recovered quickly. Then this conversation is even more overdue. You were selected because your profile matched prior tolerance cases. Tolerance, I said. That's what you call it when something recognizes me? That's what the file calls it. I laughed because if I didn't, I was going to hit him. He went on, calm as ever. We are close to a stable management model. Keeper interventions have delayed progress for years. You are not the first compatible subject we have observed. Compatible with what? I asked. He almost said the answer. I saw it. Then the room lights dipped, recovered, and dipped again. The guard nearest the door turned toward the hall. Somewhere deeper below us, a low tone began to build through the concrete. Carter looked at me once. Decision made. Everything after that happened too fast to feel planned, even though some of it was. Carter slammed the workbench into one guard, grabbed the emergency access ring from the map table, and shoved it into my hand. Core relay, he said. No halfway measures. Harlan shouted. Dr. Vale ducked behind a cabinet. One of the guards reached for his sidearm, thought better of discharging it underground, and lost a second deciding. Carter used the second. We ran. There is no graceful way to describe sprinting through a failing underground facility while alarms work themselves awake around you. Doors hesitated. Lights strobed. Intercoms crackled with half-formed words. Twice I heard my borrowed name and my real name overlapping from different speakers. Once I passed a wall mirror someone had failed to remove and saw not one reflection but three, all slightly out of sync. The core relay chamber sat 2 levels below utility in a section I had never been authorized to enter. The air down there felt thicker, almost wet, though every surface was dry. The farther we descended, the more the station seemed to lose interest in pretending to be ordinary architecture. Corridor angles felt wrong. Distances stretched. A side passage exposed bare stone where finished wall should have been. From somewhere beyond it came that breathing sound again. Massive, collective, and patient. Carter keyed us through the final blast door. The chamber beyond was mostly equipment. Racks, switching arrays, signal conditioners, isolator banks, emergency routing spines. But all of it had been built around an older vertical shaft in the center, enclosed by a ring of reinforced glass and steel grating. Looking down into it made my stomach turn. Not from height, from the sense that depth was not behaving honestly. This is where it couples to the network, Carter said. Filtered, broken, attenuated. If you disable the isolators and open the upper relays, everything hears it. Help me. He didn't move. I looked at him. What? If we do this, a lot of people die. There's a decent chance they die anyway. And if it reaches farther than you think? It already has. He stared at me for one terrible second, measuring whether I was making the choice or delivering what the thing wanted me to choose. Maybe he never resolved that. Maybe I didn't either. Then he stepped to the first panel and began cutting safeties. We worked fast. Manual overrides, relay latches, thermal trips, isolation breakers, old hardware built with the assumption that men in emergencies would still have hands. The station alarm escalated to full breach warning. Overhead, I heard the thud of distant doors sealing or failing to seal. Halfway through, the speakers woke. Not in the room. In my head, in the shaft, in the vibration of the rail under my hand. Let me out and I will return what was taken from you. I kept working. I saw Flagstaff again. Not the fantasy version this time. The real one. The delayed report. The numbers I altered. A voicemail from a coworker I never returned because I already knew what she wanted to ask. Shame came with it, but so did clarity. If the thing could erase guilt, it could erase the function of guilt too. Without it, you don't repair what you've done. You just stop feeling the shape of it. That wasn't mercy. It was amputation. Final bank, Carter said. We pulled the last paired override together. Every monitor in the chamber turned white. Then every communication line tied to the station opened at once. I know what I intended. Exposure. Raw signal without suppression, without evacuation, without the quiet edits that turned impossible events into maintenance anomalies. I wanted the world, however briefly, to receive what had been hidden under procedural language for decades. What actually traveled? I cannot describe with certainty. The shaft below us lit from depths no lamp reached. Not bright, dense, like layered stars seen through black water. The air filled with overlapping voices, none fully distinct, some certainly human, some not. My ears rang so hard I thought I'd ruptured something. Carter dropped to one knee with both hands over his head. Through the chamber glass, I saw screens elsewhere in the station coming alive. Feeds, text, waveforms, archived images, live cameras, all dissolving into the same impossible pattern. For several minutes, every active route connected to the station carried that signal outward. Then the mountain moved. The first collapse hit from below, not above. The floor heaved. Steel twisted with a noise like buildings screaming at a distance. The shaft enclosure shattered inward. Emergency lights died. Dust exploded through the chamber. Carter dragged me toward the door and something struck his shoulder hard enough to spin him. We made it into the corridor just before the ceiling behind us came down. The rest is broken pieces. Running blind under red strobes. Harlan in a cross passage yelling for people who were already dead. Dr. Vale pinned under conduit and refusing my help because another collapse was coming. Carter pushing me toward an access ladder while the lower levels groaned themselves apart. At the base of the final stair, he grabbed my coveralls and pulled me close enough that I could see blood in one eye. If you survive, he said, do not let them call this contained. Then the wall beside us opened in a seam of moving concrete and shadow, and I never saw him again. I reached the surface through a service hatch behind the north generator berm. When I turned back, half the station was already sinking into itself under a column of dust and broken light. Officially, the report blamed seismic activity and structural failure. That is not false. It is also not true enough to matter. Most of the staff died in the collapse.